Hi, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Wheaton conversation with our Spring 2025 Fellows, Danielle Brensinger, Andrew Bearnot, and Liesl Schubel. Danny is our second annual recipient of the Paul Stankard Flamework Fellowship. The fellowship honors Paul's legacy and dedication to the advancement of flamework glass. Before we go deeper into introductions, I would like to briefly explain the structure of our program for those who may be new, as well as introduce myself. I am Pamela Weichman, the Director of Education and Artist Services at WheatonArts. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm broadcasting from southern New Jersey, which I recognize as traditionally the land of the Lenni Lenape. Wheaton Conversations is presented by PNC Arts Alive, the United Nations International Year of Glass, and the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. We thank them for their support. Through membership, donations, and shopping at shop.wheatonarts.org, you can show your support. Please consider exploring these options so we can continue to offer free programs such as these. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this program, Alexander Rosenberg. Alex is a Philadelphia-based artist, educator, writer, and the Glass Studio director at WheatonArts. He earned a Master of Science in Visual Studies from MIT and a BFA in Glass from Rhode Island School of Design. He is a founding member of Hyperopia Projects, headed the Glass program at University of the Arts, and was an artist member of Vox Populi Gallery. He was cast on the Netflix series Blown Away in 2018 while teaching at Salem Community College. Alex, thank you for joining us and for leading our conversation.
Thanks for the introduction, Pam, and thanks to our new fellows for being a part of this program. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. We'll hear from Liesl Schubel today, who is originally from Ontario, is visiting us from Trenton, is a founding member of Flock the Optic, which is an arts collective that I've been aware of and a fan of for a long time. So always happy to get a chance to be around the different members of that. And the work produced by Flock the Optic kind of moves between glass performance, installation, happenings. And I think Liesl's practice is similarly diverse across many different processes and media. Liesl has a BFA from RISD and has worked all over many important glass institutions. Also very happy to have Andrew Bearnot. Andrew describes themselves as a materialist, and that really jives with my experience of their work. Coming from Chicago, works across sculpture, print, drawing, videos, and so far my experience has been Andrew's very focused on everything shiny in our studio, all the shiny things. So we're learning a lot from that curiosity. Danielle Brensinger, who's here from LA, coming from a BFA at Tyler, right down the street from us, an MFA at CSUSB, and runs Second Best Studio, which is a fabrication studio where they're in charge of all sorts of projects, making work for other people. We're very pleased to have Danny as our second Paul Staker Flame Working Fellow. So please allow our fellows to tell you a little bit more about themselves and maybe an idea of what's going to be happening while they're here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liesl. Really delighted to be back at Wheaton. I've never done a full fellowship before, but was here for about 2 weeks in 2014, I think. So delighted to be here for the 6 weeks and really so happy to be here with Andrew and Danny. It's been lovely so far, and I'm very excited to see what everybody makes over this time. The sort of like overwhelming theme of my practice is really about the folly of memory and sort of recognizing the distortions in a single perspective. I think the work in Flock the Optic and the group I'm a part of is a much like freer and weirder expression of that, and with the 2 other artists in that collective as well. And I'll show a couple pieces from that group that we actually showed at Wheaton just at the end of the talk. My practice is a little more focused in kind of the poetics of memory and sort of allowance for distortion and blur and kind of weirdness in a more subtle way, I guess. memory is the overarching theme, but I'm gonna sort of talk specifically about the inspiration in my most current projects and current practice, and then sort of look back on some older work and how I think this place has influenced that as well before I get to the newer work and what I'm exploring at Wheaton. So this is my family's cottage. It's in rural Ontario. Like Alex mentioned, I'm Canadian. I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto. We moved around quite a bit. When I was young, I've lived in England and Chicago and Providence and Washington and all of these different places, but have always had sort of the cottage as an anchor. And my parents bought it in 1983. It was like a small hunting cabin. It's expanded as they've renovated it over the years, and is a really remote and special place to me. Um, the image on the right is the aurora borealis, which we saw in October for the first time up at the lake. Some images of me growing up at the cottage on the left, really just developing a like intense appreciation for nature and solitude, and just the necessity of your own imaginings and creativity when you spend 3 months of the year, 45 minutes from the nearest town, 20 of those minutes on dirt road. And there's with my two older brothers in the bottom left. The image on the right is my wife Haley and dog Goose paddling at the cottage in this past October as well. So thinking about this sort of idealized childhood experience and location, I also sort of want to start thinking about and look at this place in a new way, at sort of the entanglements of geography and class politics and environmental concerns, and then sort of more personal, kind of like familial legacy issues and tensions and things like that associated specifically with the place. This map sort of showed where Methuen Lake is, and these markers are cottage associations. So the area that I'm from and the area the cottage is called cottage country in Canada. It's very specific kind of cultural phenomenon in this area, as well as in British Columbia in Canada. So I'm sort of starting to get into more of the tensions and entanglements of this place. On a more sort of like personal and like connected to glass note, I'm also a long distance swimmer. When I swim at the cottage, I'll swim either across or around the lake. And so Haley and Goose are in the canoe again, being my guide boat. I just put this image in thinking about, I've been blowing glass for around 15 years now, and these two activities feel very similar to me as sort of not repetitive and kind of intense activity, but also meditative, also sort of steeped in like technical things to sort of improve and things like that. So just a sort of nod also to how I think it sort of connects to my glass practice as well. So in terms of the connection to the work, this piece is called Float. It's blown glass, a large blown bubble that's then coated interiorly with plaster and left to float out on a lagoon. The piece sort of floated one at a time, so that's the first individual, and then a collective that was sort of sent out on the water together, just sort of reflective of the environment, of thinking about, I lived in Washington State for many years, and these were sort of inspired by the trumpeter swans that migrate through that area and their interaction with the environment. As these floated out, some swans flew over the piece as well. And then there I am swimming again to go and get them back. This piece is called Sigh. I'm just going to jump ahead a bit so it moves. This piece is called Sigh. It's part of a project Das Fernglas by Anna Mlazowski. And it was a call to use MailChimp, the email format, to put together either an exhibition or a piece just within the confines of MailChimp. This was in 2021, so sort of height of the pandemic. And I sort of took the opportunity again to explore memory and natural phenomenon, and sort of started to tie in the moon also, which is an important kind of idol symbol in my work, thinking about a natural object, a distant object, something that's in orbit and sort of speaks to a relationship and sort of tension with us at all times. So I made gifts for this project, included photographs, family photographs, prints and objects, and then writing from journals over the years. This piece is called Queer Artifacts. My practice is, as Alex said, quite mixed media and then sort of shows up in the installations as well. This in particular is a collaboration with H. Skank, who's a friend and collaborator. We sent objects back and forth via mail during the pandemic. And this became sort of an exploration of like a sort of cosmic bodies and like potential for these sort of like cosmic and sci-fi imaginings that felt very freeing to make, again, sort of in the kind of deep pandemic years. You can see a small black glass moon on the shelf there. That is just hot sculpted glass in the hot shop. The surface of the glass is torched, and I press rocks into the surface to kind of mimic how a moon gets its craters. And that object is sitting next to a concrete ball, very moon-like as well, but was just found in H's grandma's garden. Some close-ups of some of the objects in that installation. It says powdered glass printed through just a stencil, fired and then framed on top of prints, and the full installation. Just exploring the moon more as sort of an object of fascination, and has become an object of just like national fascination multiple times in the past decade, as totality has sort of cut in different parts of the US in the past decade. So this is in the process of making one of those glass moons. We just turned sideways across the reheating chamber in the studio and sort of inched the moon over until reaching totality in the space. And these moons, I think, are, reflective. I was talking about sort of the cottage's influence, my sort of obsession with the natural environment and sort of appreciation for that. It's also so tied to my family and family history. And these objects kind of speak to that presence in the work as well, where these moons become portraits of people past, and the specific sort of surfaces, colors, and materials applied to them are representative of different individuals. But again, the actual moons you can see probably best in the top left, where the surface is just sandblasted, hot sculpted in the glass studio. These objects also utilizing glass to speak to memory. These are tomatoes. Danny actually flame worked the tops of these for me. These clear glass tomatoes sort of partially refill with their color due to the powder coated steel puddle underneath. So as you approach, maybe they're sort of an emblem of loss at first, and then they sort of refill at least partially. And that's sort of part of the kind of obsession and exploration of what memory sort of provides. This as well has a similar kind of vibe with this piece. This twisted solid glass is only one part of the twist is gilded. The other kind of still absorbs that color and optically reflects it. And then the mirror doing something similarly to complete the loop based on a bracelet and necklace set that my Oma left to me after she passed. The tomatoes are really, for me personally, a symbol of my Opa. He was an incredible gardener, and tomatoes being his sort of pride. This is a 7-foot embroidery full-scale tomato plant that also sort of enters this place of portraiture and embodiment of the person in this object and representation of an object, and becomes a sort of shroud of him. I had the opportunity between my Oma and Opa passing to photograph her with him sort of displayed on top. It kind of blows my mind, the color story of this room being so like perfectly attuned to this piece. Yeah, very special moment. So this is called Keita. So that family connection, again, coming back to the cottage and some newer work, and then the inspiration and what I'm working on for this residency. This is my dad. We usually this time of year, I'm up at the cottage as long as the snow has melted and we start fixing things. This is us replacing a section of the stairs that had sort of rotted away and wasn't safe anymore. And spending that time and sort of thinking about this place and getting sort of really starting to really think about the more sort of nuanced tensions of this location and lifestyle and privilege and like all of these things led to this piece. This is called Overlook. So I've recreated a section of the stairs built in the same way as my dad and I do. Some found wood, some new, found screws that were too long, sort of like using whatever is around. And if it's a little dangerous, all of us know that that screw is there, so it's fine. And this was sort of attached with this plaque that is engraved with the sort of view from the cottage, but pulling out sort of these little moments of tension where the human interaction with the land sort of starts to have some influence, maybe some negativity, maybe some like, yeah, again, that tension with our experience of this like quote unquote wilderness that is really kept ideal through some sort of power and control. On the wall were these maps that I asked each of my family members to sort of map out the floor plan of the cottage through the decades and when major changes had happened. Those are hung just from sticks that I collected at the cottage and cut and nailed to the wall. And just like this moment, I had this little picture of my dad from the 80s taped to the bottom right of the stairs of Overlook there. We're twins. This piece is called Wild Daisies, a chalk pastel pulled from that image of me as a baby in the woods, and a paper mache rock hanging from here as well. My mom used to have us collect rocks from the woods, clean them, and use that as our sort of painting surface, as our canvas when we were kids. So those daisies on the right there. It's called Night Swim. I think the sort of attraction to when I do use glass and utilize it in my practice is also attached to memory, the memory of the surface and what you do to the glass, among so many other things, of its like amorphousness being really important for me as a queer person to sort of feel a real kinship with the material. But I think in this case, the surface of these just hand-rolled kind of sheet glass objects in this, and I have another version of this piece in the next slide. The surface really reminded me of water and sort of made me think of the kind of like exciting but ominous feeling of skinny dipping in the lake at night. So these shapes are mimicking sort of the shapes of the bodies in the water and have, I think, that kind of a little ominous but exciting feeling to them. So this is Night Swim as well. And then the last sort of current work about the cottage and inspiration for it are these drawings. They're about 20 by 30, chalk pastel and charcoal. These are all like super cropped zoom-ins on the common loon and the feathering of the common loon. Again, sort of like thinking about how material can sort of be my friend in thinking about memory and collection and revision and distortion and clarity. I think using chalk pastel feels very ethereal and grainy, and that you can't really ever get a sort of sharp edge to anything. So those are just called loon studies. And then this is an image from the studio at Wheaton from yesterday, maybe, just starting to think about how to translate maybe that loon feathering into glass and let it sort of stretch and deform and play in different ways. So very much in a experimental mode at the moment, and we'll continue kind of exploring different aspects of the cottage and cottage country and icons from there as I go through the 6 weeks here. But I thought it was interesting that I have this kind of bird imagery and inspiration right now, because the first time I was a sort of fellow and had a 2-week experience here, I made this installation with the help of the floppy optic crew. This is David and Nina Peng. And I think this is for this down. But we're starting to move towards this flock. And this is like where all attracted to birds in their sense of community, and it felt like a really beautiful icon in relation to the class community and within it. And on a similar theme, in 2017, Flock the Optic was invited at Wheaton to be a part of Emanation. This was sort of our little ad for our pieces. During that exhibition, we had these giant nests all around the campus with these sort of oversized blown eggs that the WheatonArts team made. And then we installed in the schoolhouse as well. So this is what viewers saw as they entered. They had an option to view this flock of birds flying on a mechanism through the kaleidoscopic wall or through the water lens on the left. So that's sort of the installation of the space. The birds were sort of very slowly flapping in there, and that's the view through the kaleidoscope. So yeah, those are my last two sort of experiences of being at Wheaton. I've come through several times just visiting, and yeah, I'm so delighted again to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Liesl. That was great. I'm Andrew Bearnot. I'm also very grateful to be back at Wheaton. I was here for a very long 3-month residency back in 2013. And I'm so grateful to be here with Liesl and Danny and the whole crew at the studio. We've already had a really fantastic week, and I'm looking forward to the next 5 weeks. Alex already did some introduction. Maybe just to say, yeah, Liesl and I did overlap briefly at RISD. At that time, I was also studying at Brown in the materials engineering department. So lots of my work is informed by that sort of very formative time. I'm currently based in Chicago, where I moved to do grad school, and I work in lots of different media, but glass remains my sort of mother material, the material that I'm always thinking with and through. And so for my presentation today, I'm going to try and focus on projects in glass. And I've sort of structured it in three little parts of things that are related. So starting with this project that I did at Wheaton in 2013 called Twilight Station. So most of the buildings on Wheaton's campus are sort of stage sets. They're reconstructions of a colonial era town. But there are 2 buildings on the property that were moved here and are original. One is that schoolhouse that Liesl mentioned, and the other is this tiny little train station that was moved from Palermo, New Jersey, and was built in 1897, and used to have I'm told, a half-scale steam locomotive that went through the trees. But when I arrived, it was not being used. So I tried to reanimate it by making handmade glass windows for the door, as you see on the left, and for these 2 larger window sections where there's this sort of bench that wraps around. So it's this little room for waiting. And so we mixed a batch of glass that was a very, very dark color. It looked like black glass, but was tuned to try and modulate daylight into twilight. So you enter the space from a brightly lit day, close the door behind you, and you're suddenly bathed in that eerie dark blue. The more I think about this project, the more I'm interested in the kind of quality of simulation of trying to like create this artificial sensation, and also just twilight, I think, as a phenomena, I keep coming back to as this sort of in between state, that also has, in painting they talk about the blue hour being when there are no shadows, because this light is so diffuse. The other thing I sort of made note of at the time was something about the Twilight Zone, science fiction ideas of the sort of fantastical displacement. Forever remembered. This is the picture that lives on the WheatonArts. Like, if you've ever applied to a residency, you've seen this picture of me struggle busing on one of those rondelles and failing to spin it open. So thank you, Wheaton, for capturing that moment and making sure that it has remained on your website for like a decade. Now I'm going to quickly just go through some pieces from before and after that time that I think are related to it. This is a piece I made while I was living in Sweden, also thinking about a kind of the sky as window. I didn't really talk about the processes, but historically, window glass is made either through spinning out this disc, a rondelle, or by blowing a cylinder and then slumping it out into a sheet. And so I was making a lot of experiments with translucency and intensity of these colors and gradients. This quality of translucency allows the object to shift from differences. This is the same object seen 3 different ways. As you move above it, there's less opacity in the top of the object, so it sort of opens up to this horizon. And a lot of thinking about sort of portals and voids. This is a more recent work from 2023 maybe, called Sky Icon Loading, that references the cyanometer, which is this 18th century scientific device for measuring the blueness of sky, and the loading icon, which are also known as throbbers. So thinking about this kind of like very highly contemporary object and this historical object, both sort of ruminating on becoming, I think about them as sort of queer phenomenological artifacts. They're about always becoming, never arriving. Okay, end of part 1. Part 2. This image is from an exhibition I had in 2022 called Calibration Matrix. And I think already at that, in 2013, when I was at Wheaton, I was thinking about calibration, but that word has really become central to how I think about everything I do. And I was working on making these sort of autonomous shapes, but thinking about how they relate to one another. And so within the exhibition, one of the walls was black, most of the walls were white, and they were on this table with cross gradient, like backdrop fade. So depending on your position and relationship to the light and the background and the objects to one another, they were very sort of porous. Your experience of the objects changed a lot. And I'm very interested in that kind of question of positionality and perspective, and making work that I think glass lends itself to this quality of really making you aware of your own looking. And maybe a sort of hidden reference in the work that I didn't even realize was there. But my sister-in-law went to see the show in Chicago, and the first thing she said was, "Oh, you made your favorite game. You made Set," which now I can't sort of look back at that show without thinking about the way in which I was. If you're not familiar with Set, it's this card game that involves sort of finding groups within this field, And so this idea of negotiating difference, finding commonalities, I think is very much embedded in this work. Oh, so I thought I would talk specifically about one of those shapes, this kind of spiral shape or helicoid shape. Um, so I had been looking at a bunch of devices that had that kind of helicoid shape, uh, components from pumps and timing screws and augers. And then I had this, I'll only make you watch this one more time. And then I had this dream. And in my best dreams, I'm not making the glass, but I am the glass. And so in this dream, my right side was hot and my left side was cold, and I was twisting. So I went to the hot shop and made an experiment, made a cylinder, heated one side and twisted, and this very strange shape emerged. And so I'm still kind of chasing these shapes that uh, are, I think of as like a kind of running a simulation, that the material itself is calculating this form. There's a single force being applied to it, but then the differential in the viscosity within the glass gives rise to these shapes. And lately I've been reanimating them on these little turntables. And Alex mentioned I've been very interested in iridescence. Uh, Still early on in those experiments, but you can see on the right one object that has some iridescence to it. Okay, end of part 2. Part 3. So in this section, I wanted to talk about sort of queer motifs that are more bodily. So this is a piece from the end of grad school in 2017 called A Dozen Lashes, where I looked at eyelashes from friends and lovers under the microscope and translated that, scaled them way up and translated them into glass, thinking about this sort of small site of femme power becoming this sort of tool. And so the ends are ground and polished. I was looking at a lot of Japanese sword traditions, technologies. And this is not glass, this is hair adhered to paper. So it's a kind of drawing made of hair, thinking about portals, but also quite literally the sink and the sort of site of that ritual. And this is from a show I had at the Leather Archives and Museum in Chicago, which is a museum specifically focused on kink and fetish. And I had been doing some work with their archival collections in their archive. So that's what's in the case there. And then these are some of my sculptural kind of responses. And on the left, you see another hair drawing that I made at a residency in Vermont based on the geometry of the toilet there, but also thinking about toilet as body, as portal, as aperture, as hole. And so this is a project that I'm working on right now at Wheaton, making a mold of this toilet and casting that negative volume. And then just in the past few days, I got really excited about the phenomenology of the flush. So I'm going to see if I can translate this in some way into glass. Takes a lot longer in slow-mo than it does in real life.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dani Brensinger. I usually like to start with a silly a picture of me in my youth to sort of lighten this because I get very anxious during these sorts of presentations. So excuse me if I stutter over my words or anything. And primarily I have a lot of notes, so I'll just try to stick to those. Um, just a little bit of background. I graduated with my undergrad from the Tyler School of Art, like Alex had previously said, in 2012. And after that, I sort of became immediately immersed in the world of glass lighting and production. I got a job at a production studio in Philadelphia almost instantaneously with my graduation from undergrad. And I worked there for a year, working 60-hour weeks, doing full production before moving to Brooklyn, New York, where I worked as a tech at Urban Glass, met Liesl, and continued to make lighting. So I helped produce a lot of lighting in the New York atmosphere for a number of years before moving to Los Angeles at the end of 2019 to pursue my own graduate career at CSUSB. And now I run a fabrication studio there with my partner. We make other work for artists. So these are just some shots of our current studio. It's usually a mess, but that's totally fine. You can see we have everything in-house but a hot shop. So I have my flame working station there with 3 dog beds for 1 dog. We have a full cold shop, kiln studio, mold making room. We also have a slight welding setup and table saw if we need to box crates for anybody. I feel like it's sort of important for my work to inform the way that I arrive at it. So I'm just going to run through some work that we make for other people. We do a lot of kiln casting to spec. So we make a lot of molds for still lighting and right now mostly artists as well. These were for a bar bathroom in LA that we had to cast these specific channels for the lighting track that fit within it. So just a lot of technical mold making, casting, and cold working. I also make a lot of these flame worked mushrooms for this artist, Max Hoover Schneider. He puts them in these fun terrariums. And we also cast him about 50 uranium Pillsbury Doughboys at one point that he also puts into these fun terrariums. And then on the left, that is also a uranium cast of a turtle fossil that we have done for him as well. And these are some flame working projects that I help fabricate for an artist, Kelly Akashi. I actually started working for her in New York and then moved out to LA and continued to work for her. So this one is about 7 inches. And then in the last year or so, we started making them larger. So this one is about 21 inches round, all the way around. And then this is the most recent one that was just in a show in LA for Freeze. So I help fabricate these and just giving information of what I do on the daily. So you can sort of see that. And then moving into my personal work, I sort of added these last minute actually as Liesl was giving her presentation because this is from a show that I did after I graduated from my undergrad while I was still in Philly. My parents separated sort of suddenly, so it was thinking a lot about family structures and where we hold and what that means as sort of having this like idea of home and where we find comfort in home. So I sculpted this representation of my childhood home that my dad actually built when I was 2 from memory, cast it in plastic, but left a lot of the mold material and cement sort of on it as this like unearthing of a memory of home. And then there are also 6 cast foam, insulation foam busts with these flame worked arrows that sort of run through them and run around the wall as well. Just thinking of like memories of home, again, what that means and sort of how that changes image in thinking of where we are as a place of home. And then I've always sort of thought of myself as a glassblower, as an object maker. So these next couple of slides are just objects that I have made that also sort of think about stills and sort of displays of home. I grew up in a lot of farmland with some moonshine stills around, but then also thinking of the idea of like what is hidden. Moonshine culture is kind of considered to be taboo and underground, but yet my Nana had all of these cut crystal and like pressed glass on display. So just thinking of like that contradiction of what is hidden and what is shown and what is considered acceptable. These are some of my personal production works. I just genuinely love blowing glass and making objects. And before coming to this residency, I never thought as my objects as art. I thought of them as objects or production. But my perception of them is steadily changing as I'm making more objects during these residencies. And this is one of my first personal pieces that I made in this style. I made this in about 2018 or 19, I believe. It's a 14-inch tall hinged filigree egg. Again, just thinking of like these precious sort of objects and recreating them. And this is all 3mm flame worked glass. So I'm going to now move into the work that I am most dedicated to currently. And this is work that I produced during my thesis year at Cal State San Bernardino. This was from my second year in the program. It's a 3-year program. And I'm really interested in sort of making people uncomfortable with my work in a lot of ways. I'm exploring the uncanny and highlighting tension and unexpected and psychological to sort of embrace personal reactions to my work. So this is another piece that I made. This is a sort of 12-inch half sphere of 4mm flame worked spheres that all branch toward this center plumb bob structure. And this is hanging, the rope is about 10 foot. So it's hanging from a 14-foot tall ceiling. And there are a lot of earthquakes in California. So again, I was just thinking about that tension of interplay between what happens if there's an earthquake, will it break? Is that part of the work then? Just having this tension hovering of a solid brass object between small flame worked spheres. And then this is moving into my thesis exhibition and where my work currently lies. So the summer before my final year of grad school, I caught a fairly rough case of COVID and was left with a lot of memory issues. I had a lot of lagging memory effects, and for lack of a better term, some areas of my brain just felt lost, if not gone. So the work within this show is a response to that tension and loss, and also acceptance and affirmation. So this exhibition is an exploration into residue, absence, uncomfortability, and tension, heightening the viewer's perception of impermanence through the materiality of the objects. So the show really came from my inability to focus after having COVID. I still currently have good and bad brain days and lingering fog, even though that has dissipated a lot within the last couple of years. And after experiencing some memory loss, I came back to my studio and was sort of rereading all of my notes from a third-person perspective. I didn't know what I was researching for the previous 2 years of my graduate research. And it was like sort of this strange reapproaching of work that I knew was mine, but no longer felt like mine. So I started reading a lot about mindfulness and how repetitive tasks can increase cognitive function and sort of like a memory through making. So I started making chain just out of habit to keep my hands moving and gain some sense of movement through and strengthen brain through that, my brain through that awareness. So that cognitive repetition became a major driving force for this exhibition. Each one of these chain sections has exactly 44 links. So in total, there are 2,376 chain links, roughly estimating 378 feet when they're laid end to end. In the gallery, this piece spans 30 foot long by 4 foot wide and is hung 7 foot from the ceiling. So I wanted all of my pieces to have a shifting effect. I'm primarily working in clear. I'm still working in clear to sort of hold on to those memories of simultaneously being there and not yet there, and working with that clear as being a diffusion of the space around us. So these diffusion panels came from that same repetition, then just really capturing the fist. From the side, they almost act as fiber objects. These are 22 by 48, or fiber optics, I'm sorry, I can't speak. These are 22 by 48. They're titled Acceptance and Affirmation. And they sort of absorb and transmit information, but from the front, they're impermeable to see through. They just reflect the light from the room. And this final piece in my exhibition is titled Wistful Awareness. It was really the start of kind of the whole exhibition, and the rest took form around it. It's my most literal translation of tension. So the only anchor point for this chain is the hook at the bottom. It's not glued in place. It's strung over the hand, and then runs through a pulley at the top of the ceiling. And there's a weight that then hangs from the chain. And without that weight, the chain would unravel. There's some details of those. And again, that only anchor point is on the floor there. I also use Rhino a fair amount to mock up some of these chain-based installations, because I don't often have a 14-foot space to install them in. So these are just some ideas, and then the renderings are what I give to galleries or shows to show the concept of my work. So this rendering then led to this piece, which is a 14-foot column. It's 14 foot from floor to ceiling and a 3-foot diameter at the floor. The shaft of the column is 28-inch diameter through the whole piece. This was shown at the Palos Verdes Art Center in the Optics of Now, which was an exhibition based on current glass artists in Southern California. So these images are now moving into another 6-week residency that I had at the end of last year at the Pilchuck Glass School in Stanwood, Washington. I was sticking with the same themes of memory as my thesis exhibition, and really thinking about the memory of water and how we can freeze that moment of touch. Both glass and water share some intriguing similarities in their fluid properties and can both be considered amorphous solids. So I was thinking about how glass has a memory every time we touch it, and attempting to freeze that memory of touch in water as glass. So that is a negative imprint of the hand, and just again freezing that like sort of puddle of water in a moment of touch. I was also working on a series of bird cages and thinking about memories being trapped within. I was reflecting on my experience with COVID and thinking about my Nana, who had a very bad case of Alzheimer's in her later years, and sort of comparing what it would feel like to be trapped within that experience. So this is sort of a little literal translation of placing cages within cages. And again, this is all 3mm flame worked borosilicate glass. I'm very grateful to be the second Paul Stankard Flameworking Fellow here. And in the flame shop, while I'm at this residency, I am focusing on inspiration from these pressed plates that are in the museum, and using them as a mild reference for doilies and lace, and just thinking about my grandmother, who is a habitual crocheter, and using these ideas of blankets and what we hold our memories in. So I am flame working these sort of lace blankets and doilies out of 3mm glass. And then these will then get slumped over forms of either my hands or feet to sort of capture that memory of being draped over something, but just as the clear object. I'm also interested in the iridization splay as a way of distortion, sort of rather than a coating. So I'm playing with how that amplifies the clear to give it a little bit more presence, but still semi-disappear. And that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. That was really wonderful and entertaining. And, you know, as we kind of discussed between us, it was really interesting to see work from the three of you in context of one another, in spite of you not having worked together very long. So for those that are in the audience, now is a great time to ask questions. You can enter them into the Q&A chat, and I will feed them to our fellows. But in the meantime, I do have a couple things to ask you about. This is actually just, and I have some like points of comparison to maybe talk about if they fit. But Andrew, I was really captivated by the dream, and maybe that's just my interest, but I was reminded of this William Blake drawing. Have you ever seen it? It's the William Blake's illustration of a man who came to him in his dream and taught him how to paint. And I'm wondering if you and anybody else in the group can talk more about dreams and how they might figure into artistic practice, because I love that even just from this technical discussion. Or
Well,
not.
yeah, I mean, I can start. Yeah, as I sort of mentioned, my best dreams, you know, sometimes I'll dream about like making stuff, but in the best dreams, I am the stuff. I am the matter, and sort of things are happening to me, which I feel like for me is the most abstracted, kind of like connected I can get to matter. I also think that like, I mean, this is very psychoanalytic, but we are talking about dreams. I feel like I don't always relate to people. And I just have always found the so-called inanimate world to be very lively and sort of like full of excitement. And I feel like I can sort of always connect to materials in ways that I don't always feel like I can connect to people. It's also like you can connect through time and through space and across languages with material and with making. So I'm not really answering your question about dreams, but I do feel like for me, I don't know, this idea of like connecting, like the dream space is the only time I can like inhabit materiality like in a very direct way.
I love that, and obviously no pressure to the others. But if there is any instance of dreams kind of influencing some way the practice or development of work, I'd be interested to hear it. Otherwise, I could move on to less niche questions. I'll move on to less niche questions. We actually do have one from the audience right now, which is from Patty Clune. What advice can you give people applying for residencies? It's a good group to be asking.
Sure. I mean, I can speak from having previously worked at other nonprofit institutions and run juries and being on juries. I don't know if speaking from the position of receiving, it always feels very mysterious on the receiving end of like which applications work and which don't. I think my sort of advice to others has always been to be knowledgeable and specific about the institution offering the residency and why that place, like what's unique about that place that would be a good fit for you and the projects that you want to make. And I think some specificity there can be really powerful. I think for me, I think in my application, I did talk about sort of home, and I live like an hour from here, and that coming to this place, and a place that is like an ode to memory in a lot of ways, and like recreation of spaces and guessing, I think, in, in some ways, and then having real historical artifacts in other ways, is just like really nurturing for my practice, and the kind of guesswork that I'm doing, and the kind of recreation that I'm interested in. So there was some alignment there, and I think that's really valuable, because of course, every artist wants time and space and funding for their practice, but I think institutions are excited about people that are specifically excited about them. I don't know if that's helpful, but
That's wonderful. So yeah, a couple other things. So one thing that struck me as kind of a moment to make comparisons between your respective practices. In fact, Danny, at the end, we were talking about this tension, this like material tension, and I was kind of listing all these different tensions in the respective practices. And one that kind of came up quite a lot was this glass as this tool, like this desire to make permanent something fleeting. And I really saw that in the way, like Andrew's project in the Twilight Station, like the idea of stopping twilight and making that permanent really kind of fits in that realm to me. I think a lot of your discussion about memory, you know, and in fact, I saw the station as kind of this like Proustian place to like, you know, sit in twilight and kind of think about things from the past. And Liesl, of course, you know, similarly, some of the discussion of the moon, you know, everybody looking at the totality and thinking, remembering that experience for myself when everything kind of dims and like the natural world kind of quiets, and there's this kind of space made for this place between lightness and dark. So I'm wondering if the three of you want to talk a little bit about how that theme kind of makes its way into your work.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because we were discussing this conversation before we had this conversation in here, and how we didn't really sort of know that much about each other's practices, even though we all have like some connections to each other, and just like the work that we're working on now. So it's been really interesting for us. And I was noticing that as well, of like just looking at my notes and then hearing Liesl and Andrew speak before I even went. I was like, oh, I feel like I'm going to be repetitious. But I think that's just like a really interesting commonality that we all have. And it's going to be really fun to explore through the rest of this residency. And just the way that we all interact with memory. And we were all talking about like group memories the other night, and how that can be a false memory as well. So I think that's an interesting commonality that we all have.
Yeah, I will just add to that. I mean, I think memory, ephemerality, but there's also something like watery. I mean, Danny, I feel like you just showed us yesterday those pieces from Pilchuck, and that like something clicked. And Liesl was talking about bottles, at the looking through rippling water at bottles and trying to imagine how to make a bottle that has those ripples in it. And I guess something clicked for me. Yeah, with the toilet stuff, just I think there's something very specific happening between us, and maybe that's just a characteristic of glass, but that idea of trying to hold on to something that is always slipping away.
I mean, I think the attraction is not only that it freezes, but unfreezes again. And I think we all have this kind of like willingness to like bask in that disturbance and like let it go again, or like and bring it back, and like find a different moment and like melt it again. I feel like we've already done that several times in this residency. We're like, I made this thing, let's just like melt it flat, melt it flat, pick it up again. Like I think that like yeah, amorphousness is so appealing to all of us, but it seems like none of us necessarily are decided on an end point of the object, which is really exciting. And like even Andrew putting those objects back on a turntable, like just not letting them be still, like still finding that motion and amorphousness, I think we're all attracted to, which is like so specific to glass, but like I think unusual in practice.
We have another one from the Q&A. If anybody else has questions, please, and we'll probably go for just a few more minutes. So now's your chance. But from Noel, we have, how do you feel about working in front of an audience? As you've experienced a bit as part of this residency, and also I think in your respective lives.
For me personally, I don't mind it. I teach a lot at summer schools as well as university program. So I'm sort of used to being a little bit on display and having to field questions and working with the material while fielding those questions and responding to both the material and the person. So for me, it's not, I don't mind it. I don't regularly put myself on display, so it's sort of nice to have this moment of interacting with the public and getting more comfortable talking about the processes that you're working on in front of an audience.
Yeah, I like to choose when that happens and like don my announcer character in some way to sort of like be willing to be witnessed in that mode, I think is probably, so that's a really nice part of this residency is like we can really choose when to work in front of the public and when to not. But yeah, I do, when I sort of don the character, I do enjoy it because I have like 16 years of hyper specific knowledge just in my brain. So when someone comes by and is curious about it, I'm like, like here it all is. So yeah, that can be really fun. And glass is such a fascinating material that so few people have access to the like knowledge of how these things are made and and like how the material works and all of these like fascinating historical tidbits that I'm very willing to share those with like a interested audience. But yeah, I want it to be in a moment of my choosing.
Okay, I got one more, and then we can wrap it up for the night. Liesl, this one's for you. I was hearing, in the earlier parts of your talk about Flock the Optic and other kind of collaborative projects. I was hearing kind of words like collaboration and collective, and I was even seeing that in a warped way with some of the tensions you expressed between like people and natural stuff at the cabin. And I guess I was kind of wondering in that realm, like where's the edge of collaboration and kind of conflict?
Yikes. No, that's a good, yeah. I think I'd lean on that like idea of willingness again and consent to to collaborate, which the natural world cannot do with us. So yeah, and I think it's sort of like there's questions of power and influence and those kinds of dynamics as well, where Flock the Optic is a very interesting project in that we all have sort of an equal say in the final thing that is created. And if someone really wants something to be a particular way, we all try to say yes as much as possible, which is how the work gets so like twisty and strange, and then ends up usually needing to be interactive because then we're like your voice too, like come in and touch it and like whatever, knock something over or like talk on this microphone. So I know I didn't speak about that work, but they tend to be very like sort of messy interactive installations. I think where those lines then in my own practice as well, I think I take a lot of lessons from the flock and the sort of like unlocking some part of my brain that gets sort of like constricted by the specificity of research I'm working on in a certain moment, that when I start to collaborate with someone else on equal footing as artists, it like unlocks the rest. And I'm just like, what about this? Like, what about that? And it just can feel a lot more kind of open creatively, where my practice sometimes I feel like I can get so specific that things start to like shut in a little bit, and I'm like, it must be this, or like this piece of research now needs to get incorporated. I'm like, where then like the two guys from the flock come in and I'm like, it could be anything. And somehow still has a really character, like specific character to the work between the three of us, because then we're all just sort of tornadoing together in our own ways. So in terms of like collaboration, I think that's how I work. The sort of question about the ability to then like where there's interest in how sort of there's more conflict, and like where things are sort of coming together and meeting in tension points. I don't know if I'd use the word collaboration for that. I think there's, like I was sort of saying, like where area things or like areas or where sort of like power is involved in shaping something idealized, that's not collaborative, you know? So I think like that's what I'm sort of starting to like pull at and pull apart with thinking about like vacation land or like things like that. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that's a great one to wrap up on. But thank the three of you once again. I'm going to pass it off to Pam to wrap up our program.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was an absolute pleasure to hear a little bit about your work, especially since I've known the majority of you for quite some time, and it was nice to see this evolution of thought, as I'm sure some of our audience members who have known you felt as well. For everybody who would like to continue to stay in touch with what our artists are working on, please visit their websites. They're listed here on the screen, and they were also posted in the chat. So I encourage you to continue to see what they are doing. And also, if you are able to visit WheatonArts while they are here for their 6-week fellowships. Please be sure to register for our next Wheaton conversation. The title of that one is Paved with Promise, a conversation about the impact of the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act. Our artists will be Nadine Lafond, Nina Pan, and Pepe Santana. Our folklorist moderators will be Iveta Piergova and Marian Jacobson. They will be joining us on Thursday, May 15th, and you can visit wheatonarts.org to register for that program. As always, I'd love to hear from you if you are new to this series or to Wheaton Arts, and as well as those who have been with us before. Please feel free to contact me with any questions or comments that you may have. My email address is here. It's pweichman@wheatonarts.org. And I sincerely thank you for being here, and I hope that you join us for future programs. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.